Coming up next on HBC TV 25, Spirit of the Heartland with Joyce Woodworth, brought to you by Winona Health, a friend for life, and by Merchants National Bank, with real local ties.
Winona Health's Community Memorial Hospital offers state-of-the-art capabilities, including minimally invasive surgery. Highly skilled surgeons and nurses make your care their first priority.
From our first call to the emergency department throughout Cassie's surgery, we received outstanding care.
Community Memorial Hospital. Exceptional surgical care close to home.
Winona Health, a friend for life.
What is banking all about? It's about him, her, them. It's about managing today's challenges and planning for tomorrow's opportunities. It's having someone there when you need them, a trusted resource, a partner, a bank that knows you, not as a number or an account, but as a friend. Far from ordinary, right at home. That's Merchants Bank.
I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland. Television sets did not begin appearing in Winona area homes until the mid-1950s. Before that, it was all about radio. Radio came to Winona in 1938. Today we're going to find out more about its history, talk with some longtime announcers, and learn how radio is still connected in current times.
1230 was the frequency, and KWNO were the call letters for Winona area's very first radio station. The very first show KWNO aired was called Mississippi Time at 7 o'clock in the morning. Throughout the day, a variety of music and entertainment shows were brought across the airwaves. Some came from a transcription disc, and some came live. A half hour was set aside to bring a local orchestra live from the popular Oaks nightclub. News of the World was broadcast several times during the day, and Bill Mickle, the station manager, went out on the streets for 10 minutes each day as the Marigold Man, sponsored by the local dairy, to inquire how the locals felt about serious issues, such as, which shoe do you put on first in the morning? KWNO was located around the block from the new City Hall at 216 Center Street. It was begun by Max White, the owner of Winona's newspaper, the Winona Republican Herald. It was one of 30 radio stations in the state of Minnesota. In 1938, all stations west of the Mississippi River were required to begin their call letters with the letter K. The WNO stood for 3 letters in Winona. Before turning into a radio station, the building was used as a medical clinic by Dr. Keyes, who lived in the beautiful Italianate home across the street. When he sold the building to Max White in 1937, he moved his medical practice into several rooms at the back of this home. The building at 216 Center was remodeled into a state-of-the-art radio station, with 2 studios for recording and a control room between them for announcing. There was a reception area and a transcription library. The upstairs had sleeping rooms the 9 staff members could rent out for living quarters. A direct telephone line led from the control room here to the transmitter house, which was located south of Sarnia Street between Sioux and Wilsey on the marshy wetland near Lake Winona. From the transmitter room here, the signal was sent to a 199-foot tower, which stood behind the building, and from here broadcast to Winona area listeners.
I know
tower itself was built by a group from Pittsburgh who used a team of horses for the heavy work. It weighed 9,100 pounds and was made of steel. That tower is gone now, and the building on Center Street was moved in 1994. It was actually transplanted on Broadway, where it was remodeled into an apartment building.
And then you'll come right back to me.
I'm sitting now with two very long-time radio men, and I'm very honored today to have Al Thurley with us and Chuck Williams. And Chuck, I want to tell you that I'm truly honored to have you because you go way back in Winona. In fact, I understand that you started in KWNO 4 years after they started on the air.
Yes, that's true.
So what year would that have been?
Well, they went on the air in 1938.
Okay.
And I joined them in the spring, it would be in the late spring of 1942.
Were you just coming out of the service, or were you just coming out of the college?
No, in 1942, Joyce, I was just a new-time graduate from St. Mary's College. At the time, it was college. And I had been hanging around KWNO studios for probably most of my senior year.
So when you started at KWNO, you were about 21 years old, and I understand that you came from Chicago.
A big city, yeah. I was a South Side resident, born and raised there, attended Mount Carmel High School.
Tell me how you first got your inspiration to become a radio man.
Well, I think I probably was still in high school at the time, Joyce. We had several very good sports announcers in Chicago at the time doing the Chicago Cubs and Chicago White Sox, the Bears. And I just enjoyed listening to them, and I thought, boy, I'd like to do that sometime.
Let's talk about when you started then at KWNO.
All right. May I mention that first I started as a substitute reporter for the Winona Republican Herald at the time. I still wanted to be in radio, and so I saw where a job was open at KROC in Clinton, Iowa. I auditioned for the job, and they offered me a chance. And then I came back to Winona to get my belongings, and when I returned to Winona, I found out that one of the announcers there had received his draft notice and was going to be taking off for the Army. So I stepped into his place, called Clinton, Iowa, and said, no, thank you.
Let's talk about some of the shows that were on the air way back then.
You'd laugh at this one. When I was a nighttime disc jockey from 11 until midnight. And it was a program that we named Willie's Waxworks. And at that time we had records that were 16 inches in size, and the turntables were 16 inches across, what they called electrical transcriptions.
What were some of the tunes that you were playing back then?
Well, if I could remember a few of them, they were songs that Frank Sinatra was singing with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra at the time. The slow dance music at that time. There were jazz tunes, of course, and a few of the up-tempo jitterbug, I guess they called it.
The big band era.
The big band, yeah.
Chuck began at KWNO during World War II, and in his first year there, he enlisted in the Signal Corps Reserves. In the spring of 1943, he went on active duty until the war was over. During that time, he served in the Philippines, where he used his skills as a wartime radio announcer.
I did get back to KWNO right at the end of the basketball season in 1946. And I think I ended up doing a basketball game in St. Paul for Cotter in the state Catholic basketball tournament at that time. It was a very enjoyable experience and got me kind of started in it.
He actually dove and tackled him, I thought.
For the next 40 years, Chuck was the sports announcer for KWNO. Whether you were listening to a college football game, a Winona Chiefs baseball game, or a high school basketball game, Chuck's voice is what you heard over the airwaves.
Johnson figures Cotter will get the basketball, and the Ramblers are going to be in the state championship game for the second year in a row. A great comeback here in the...
Tell me about one of the most exciting games that you were actually the announcer for.
I think it was the time that Cotter won its first state championship, and that was when they were in the state Catholic League. The opposition in the final game was De La Salle High School from Minneapolis. They were extremely popular and very highly rated. In fact, the newspaper in one of the newspapers in the Twin Cities the day of the championship game said that Cotter High School was marching jauntily to the basketball guillotine. That was it with De La Salle. And they did beat De La Salle and took the state Catholic title at that time. It was just a marvelous feeling for me, and I know for all of the fans and the students. Really enjoyed it.
And how were you able to get, so you knew that they were winning in this game, and the excitement was building in the crowd.
It would build.
How did you ever express that on the radio?
I wish I could tell you, Joyce. You have to be watching it, I think, and let the feelings be natural.
So there's the buzzer. The final score, Winona Cotter 44, Montgomery Lonsdale 38, and the Ramblers will be in the state championship ball game.
Tell me about the joy that you feel in being a radio announcer.
I think just being able to paint a picture for the people at home who were not able to be at a particular event, and the people that you get to know.
Well, Chuck, thank you for all your stories. I mean, people have been listening to your great voice for a long time now, and it's been a very soothing, compassionate, warm feeling for a lot of people hearing your voice.
It puts me to sleep now.
Well, Al, let's talk about you. Tell me when you got your start in radio.
Well, I got started really many, many years ago when I was a little kid. I just loved listening to the radio, listening to people like Chuck, listening to people like Paul Harvey. I think from the time I was in elementary school, I always wanted to be a radio announcer. And when I was growing up, I became friends with actually he was the son of the owner of KWNO. His name's Steve Allen. Ed Allen was the owner at the time, along with Rod Hurd when they purchased it from the newspaper. And we'd go down to KWNO as little kids, and the Associated Press teletype would continue to spew out information all the time. It was one of those big old-fashioned black machines that you always see perhaps in movies or something like that, and not everything was used that came over that wire, so we would, with permission, take some of those items and stories on the AP wire, bring them back to Steve's house, and pretend to be radio announcers. And then when I was in high school, I was at a church event in Rochester. Part of what I had to do is to give a speech in front of the entire youth group there and asking for their support. And I did that, and then somebody afterwards told me, "Gee, you sound just like a radio announcer."
While Al was growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, things were happening at KWNO. The tower on Sarnia was destroyed, and a new tower was put up on Garvin Heights. And in 1948, KWNO FM was added to the airwaves. It was at this time radio throughout the nation took its largest jolt. The entertainment that people sought on the radio moved to television, and a new format emerged in radio. Instead of gluing themselves to radio in the evenings to be entertained by such shows as Amos and Andy or The Lone Ranger, people across America turned to their visual box, TV, and radio became used for background music, local news, weather, and ball games. The radio we grew up with would never be the same. Rod Hurd and Ed Allen bought out Max White in 1961. Rod was a well-known announcer and character throughout the town of Winona. One of his well-known shows was announcing the fireworks during Steamboat Days. Rod became the sole owner in the 60s and sold out KWNO in 1985 to Ray Wheeler. Forever a perpetual teenager, Rod's wish was to either die in the arms of a beautiful woman or on the tennis court, his serve. He did just that. He passed away enjoying life on the tennis court, his serve, 7 years after he sold KWNO.
Oh, there you are.
My goal was always to work at KWNO. Really, that was my goal. One of their announcers, her name was Becky Bell, had gone to some place in Iowa, and they had an opening for a morning announcer. So that's where I started. And this was in about 1970.
You'll find strange things in trivia books, like what celebrity couple, when going through a divorce, divided, are you ready for this, their toilet tissue into 2 equal piles? Who was it? You remember who that was? I don't. But according to this particular trivia book, it was Dick Powell and Joan Blondell.
And then we had a program that we switched our feed from the studio itself to Arcadia, Wisconsin, and we had Ernie Reck doing his polka show called Arcadia on the Air Monday through Saturday. Then on Sundays from 12:30 to 1, it was the Ernie Reck show.
Al Thurley will be along in just a moment, but Howard's Hardware Hank is what you need and what you need to know. And listen to some of these special buys. Super Scrubber Sponge Mop at just...
Ernie was the leader of a polka band that played throughout western Wisconsin and many parts of Minnesota. And he was so popular as a on-the-site band, a live band performing at one of the night spots, that we decided to get him on the air. And he was a real broadcast character.
I think you either liked Ernie's music and Ernie, or you didn't. Because I remember in our household growing up, and as soon as the polka, which was like da 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 da,
you've got it down.
As soon as it went on, our radio went off. In other parts of the town in the area, the exact opposite happened. But I think I remember hearing somebody say that when Ernie started, they gave him 6 months. And I think he lasted well over 45 years, and his program of polka music is still going on today on KWNO. So.
And when I was growing up, I remember getting ready for school in the morning, always listening to the Choate musical clock. And I understand that, too, is probably one of the longest running shows that KWNO ever had. Talk about that a little bit.
You were familiar with that, too, weren't you?
Oh, sure. I listened to it as Joyce did growing up, and then had a chance later on to either be the engineer announcer on there, or because you, Chuck, did the show for many, many years.
For a period of time, yes.
Well, actually, Mr. Choate actually was the original announcer on it,
the original
wasn't
one, yeah.
Right, when it first went on the air, which was, I think, the first week that KWNO was on the air, it was sponsored by the Choate department store, and Charlie Choate, who was one of the founders, he and Hannibal Choate were the original owners of that store. And Charlie was the male host on the musical clock, which was one of the longest continual running radio programs in the nation.
Do you recall any favorite radio jingles?
Trade in your troubles, the old family bus. Let it apply to a brand new buy. It's worth more with us. Now, don't ask me why I remember that, but...
I didn't know you could sing.
All right, let's talk about now your involvement with television. You both have moved from the radio and you're both somewhat involved with television. Al, let's talk about your capacity in TV now.
Well, that started in about 2003 when I started working for HBC in advertising sales and kind of getting back into the broadcasting field. For about 11 years, I was director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, so I'm excited to be back in electronic medium again and working with people, well, most especially Wayne Valentine, who recently left here at HBC, but just get a chance to work with him again as I did back in the days at KWNO.
I went to work, first of all, for MediaWorks under Bud Beckler after I left KWNO. That was in 1986. And I stayed with MediaWorks until just a short time ago, as a matter of fact, for 19 years. It was right around 19 years, all told, that I left there and came to work for HBC. I don't think that they hired me for on-screen talent. Not a bit.
Shortly after Chuck went to work for MediaWorks, its president, Bud Beckler, began another radio station in Winona. It was presented from the St. Teresa's Library building, now part of the in-town St. Mary's University campus, known as KHME Home 101. Almost 20 years after KWNO began, a second radio station was started in Winona by Al Tedesco. KAGE AM, or 1380 on your dial, started in 1957. Jim Getz purchased it in 1961, and Jerry Pappenfuss joined him as a partner in 1965. In 1970, Jerry and his wife Pat bought out Jim Getz, moved KAGE to 752 Bluffview Circle, and began KAGE FM. They purchased KWNO AM and FM in 1995, and in 2000 acquired KHME. Today they run the 5 stations from their Bluffview Circle building, now known as Winona Radio.
I'm primarily writing sports copy now for the sports portions of the newscasts that are done by Dave Dickey. He's now the anchor.
Well, guys, I want to thank you both so much. We've enjoyed listening to your wonderful voices throughout the years. You've been great. Thank you so much. And good luck to you.
Thank you for having us, Joyce.
All right.
One thing all radio announcers have in common are their beautiful voices. And thanks to HBC Television, Channel 25, 3 of Winona's favorite radio voices were put together with their faces when they presented Wayne Valentine, Dave Dickey, and Justin Barrientos as their news anchors. And with us today are HBC's current news anchor, Dave Dickey, and Justin Barrientos. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland.
Thank you.
Now, Dave, you are the latest news anchor here for us at HBC Television. Tell us about your radio background. Let's talk about when you first started. What got you inspired to become a radio announcer?
I used to have an old AM radio that operated on batteries, and I'd go to bed listening to WLS and stations like KAAY out of Little Rock, Arkansas. And just at night you could just hear all those great AM stations. And used to go through about 3 sets of batteries a week because I'd fall asleep with the radio on. So I always had a fascination with radio, but it wasn't until my oldest sister one day said, you know, you should get into radio broadcasting. You may enjoy that. And so that was kind of the reason that I got into it. I thought, well, I'll give it a try and see what happens. And so I ended up enrolling at Winona State in the mass communication department. And my first semester there, I made a beeline for the radio station and met a man named Sam Schuth from Winona who was on the air that day, and he pointed me in the right direction and ended up here.
And what year did you start into radio?
It was in 1986, and that was at KGFM, KG95. It was 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. For a college student was quite a sacrifice. I actually got kind of burned out pretty quickly because with school and everything, so I took a little time off and then started up again with KWNO.
Let's talk about the shows that you had on KWNO.
We would do the KWNO pizza party, and that ended up being a lot of fun. We had a couple of different pizza places sponsored over time, and we'd give away free pizzas and take requests and do trivia questions and just lots of fun. It was just good old-fashioned radio, and it was just a blast to do it.
What do you recall as one of your funnest incidents from being on radio back in the pizza party days?
Pizza party days, when somebody called up and wanted to come down and get my autograph.
Recently announced more than $250,000.
Dave remained in radio until 2005, when he began selling ads for HBC. He became the news anchor for Channel 25 in 2006.
Winona ORC, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and others. Executive Director Beth Faulkner-Moe said the decisions
Dave took over for Wayne Valentine, who was the news anchor for HBC since its conception in 2000. Wayne's rich baritone voice was also heard on radio since the early 1960s.
Well, Winona and area boat owners are invited to attend a free vessel safety. Been doing this for 46 years, would you believe?
I didn't think you were more than 35 years old. That surprises me, Wayne.
People will say to me, it's been a long career, and it's, who knows if it's over? We don't know. We don't know what the road of life, where we'll travel from here, but we're up to the challenge and we will be there. So again, tonight I want to thank the company. They gave me the opportunity to pioneer television news here in Winona. And
in April of next year, Winona and area residents will have a new option for their dining and golfing. According to Winona
Justin was a radio announcer for Winona Radio for 6 years when he switched over to television as Wayne's backup announcer. He also created the Sports Buzz, a talk show about local sporting events, and was actually best known for his energetic play-by-plays during the local high school ball games.
Place in the HVL Gold Division. Both teams coming into this game with a record of 9-1 in their division. And if the Counter Ramblers can hold on, they will have first place. Well, the 47-game losing streak is over. The Ramblers have beaten the 4th-ranked team in the state, 57-49.
It was one of those kind of childhood dreams, you know, one of those things where sometimes you want to be a baseball player or an astronaut. Well, I couldn't hit very well, so I couldn't be a baseball player, and math and science weren't really my thing, so I couldn't be an astronaut. But I would listen to the radio, just like David said, and listen to all the different announcers that were on there and listen to the ball games. And I thought, you know, I could do something like that. So actually, my junior year of high school, I went around to all the radio stations looking for a part-time job somewhere. And no one really had anything. The first place that I looked was KHME, which eventually in 1994 then I got hooked up with, and I worked there as an evening and weekend announcer.
Is it a lot more nerve-wracking on television than radio?
A little bit. You know, you have all the lights, and you're conscious that people can see you as well as hear you, and so it's a little bit different, yeah.
In radio, you've got the mic, you don't see anybody. Here, you see your floor director, the camera operator, and that's about it. But now they see you. In radio, we used to show up wearing, on weekends especially, T-shirts and shorts and
Now, being the youngest of all the anchors here, Justin, do you have any words of advice for the young man just coming out of college or high school, or the young woman that may want to get into broadcasting somehow?
I'd say expect the unexpected, basically. When I was hired at Winona Radio in 1998, I was hired to be the afternoon announcer on KG Country, on the AM station. And I did that for one day. And that was because the day that I was hired, the morning guy on KG FM quit. And so they needed someone to fill in that spot. And since I had just come in, they asked me, do you want to do that shift? Here I am, you know, just out of college, and already I'm a morning announcer on an FM radio station. And you're never too old, you're never too young. I started out at 17 in radio, and you know, kept going from there. And like I had said before, it took me about a year to get my first real interview at a radio station. And the first interview that I had was the first job that I got at KHME, working along with Dave. So keep at it.
And you mentioned persistence, and Justin, he displayed persistence to a T. He would come in at least once a week and talk to me if we had anything open, and we didn't. We just didn't have anything open, and finally something came open, and Justin, I think he came in that day that actually something came open.
I think so,
we,
yeah.
Sat down and talked and struck a deal.
Yeah, and you never know what kind of friendships you're going to make coming into, because you know, Dave allowed this young kid to come into the booth and sit in during his shift and you know, listen to how he practiced in radio and how he did his job, and I learned a lot from that, and I used that as I went along.
Thank you both for joining me today on the history of radio. And Dave, I look forward to hearing you and seeing your face on the news in many years to come. And Justin, thank you so much for all your great broadcasting and all the energy you brought to us at HBC.
All right, thank you, Joyce.
Thanks for joining me today on the History of Radio show. I'd also like to thank my guests who have taken us back to what radio in Winona was like in the early days. I'm Joyce Woodworth. Please join me again next week. Until then, enjoy the spirit of the Heartland.